Welcome to this discussion. My name is Lotte Hughes. I'm an historian of Kenya. Until recently, I was a senior research fellow at the Open University. Just very briefly, I was studying FGM and alternative rites of passage as part of a research project that I was leading on cultural rights and constitutional change. I'd like to introduce my colleagues, Grace and Damaris. If you'd like to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. My name is Grace Wanja Wamue-Ngare. I'm an associate professor from the Department of Gender and Development Studies, Kenyatta University. Kenyatta University is one of the public universities in Kenya. My academic background is in African culture and religion, but currently I'm teaching gender studies. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Damaris Parsitau. I'm a senior lecturer at Egerton University and the director of the Institute of Women, Gender and Development Studies. My current research focuses on Maasai girls' education. The intersection between culture and girls' education is what I'm doing right now.
Our discussion is going to be about female genital mutilation, also known as female genital cutting, but most importantly alternative rites of passage, which I'll explain in a moment. FGM/C has been outlawed in Kenya, as you know, since 2001, and yet it still persists in many communities. According to the 2014 figures, 21% of the female population aged 15 to 49 has undergone FGM. I just wondered why you think it is still practiced. What are the reasons for its continuation, despite it being legal, despite it being a human rights abuse, despite people knowing about the health reasons for banning it?
Yes, female genital mutilation is very prevalent despite it being banned by the government and despite the fact that there is an anti-FGM body that has been created to try to eradicate female genital mutilation. The statistics are worrying that despite the ban, FGM is still going on in broad daylight, and in some cases it is going on underground, and it is medicalized now, so that you have medical doctors actually performing FGM on young girls as young as 5 years old and 10 years. I think the drivers of FGM are many and complex. They are multidimensional too. You have socio-cultural issues, you have economic issues of poverty, you have the fact that FGM is a long-standing tradition that has been passed on from generation to generation. So it's deeply ingrained in people's psyches and people's memories. And it becomes very difficult to eradicate that, even if you use the language of rights. It's a human rights issue. It's against human rights. It mutilates a girl, but it goes long before human rights ever came in. And it takes time for societies and communities and practitioners of FGM to understand and actually appreciate that. So I think there are so many reasons that FGM has continued to persist, and I think it's going to continue persisting for a very long time unless we adopt different ways of intervention.
Thank you, Damaris.
And I think to add more on what Damaris has said, female circumcision is about people's life and culture, and most of the bodies, organizations that have tried to actually address it in the name of eliminating it are very artificial, or they focus on the artificial phase of it and concentrate more on the cutting. But cutting is only part of the initiation ceremony that is so much entrenched in the cultures of the people who practice it. And I think the reason why it has persisted for so long, irrespective of all these bodies, like my colleague has said, human rights, people who undergo FGM do not think it's even a human rights issue. Human rights to what? These are parents who take their children because they love them. And they love them to the extent that they want them to be part of belonging. So actually, banning it is now the human rights, it's a human rights issue according to them, because you are making your own child not belong to a community. So they don't see it the way other people see it. The lenses that are used by the communities that practice FGM are very different from the lenses that those people who are stopping it, including the government itself or even that board, use. So when two groups of people are using different lenses to see a particular issue, then definitely it's bound to continue. So unless we get to a level whereby we are able to bring communities to a level to see FGM as a human rights issue, to see it as an anti-feminist issue, then that's the time we can say now we are talking on the same plane. But at the moment, I don't think we are. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to alternative rites of passage now, which is usually shortened to ARP. Just to briefly explain, as you both know, ARP is a relatively new practice touted by NGOs and donors as an alternative to girls' initiation into womanhood, but without FGM or FGC. Its elements of instruction to girls and the ceremonial elements are intended to mimic elements of the traditional initiation for pubescent girls. It's a central plank that's become very popular, as you know, in many FGM eradication strategies in Kenya and other parts of East Africa. But is there any evidence that it actually works? From your research and observation, what would you say to that?
I think there is no academic research so far, to the best of my knowledge, that has tried to assess the impact, the successes or the failures of FGM, of alternative rites of passage. What I know though is that there are few theses, master's theses and PhD theses that has tried to understand how societies perceive alternative rites of passage. And what those studies have shown is that there is a lot of resistance in many communities like the Maasai, that people have not accepted it totally. So while the NGO worlds and international donors have imaged alternative rites of passage as a success, and that every year they are graduating at 3,000, 1,000 students, girls that have undergone alternative rites of passage without the cut, I question its sustainability and I question its successes, because this has not been given the due academic process to where people study whether it's really successful. For example, we have no study that tells us that the 3,000 girls that have gone through it in Maasai land did not succumb when they went back to the villages. Studies have shown that when girls go through alternative rites of passage and they are released back into their communities, they go back, and because they succumb to so much pressure from their communities, from their peers, they decide they want to undergo female genital mutilation. So there are questions of sustainability, there are questions of whether NGOs are giving the proper picture, there are questions about data that is missing, and there are also questions about the fact that no academic studies so far has been carried out to determine the success. What we have though are hundreds of reports from one side, and that is driven by donors and driven by grassroots organizations that are working with alternative rites of passage.
I think the sustainability question is a very important one, because of course funding streams are unreliable, and NGOs can't fund ARP forever. Though they will tell you that it would be preferable if communities took it over themselves, but again, communities as such can't attract big funding from donors. Would you like to add anything to that,
I would
Grace?
also maybe say it also depends on who is rating the success. So the NGOs, they are very successful because they are able to bring this massive, large number of girls and publicize to the world, look, we have this alternative rite of passage. These girls have now matured. These girls are now this and this and this. But I think when again you try to define the success, success is not the parading. Success is not even going through the alternative rite of passage. The success should be based on what is its impact on the community. Is the community seeing it as a way of replacing FGM? And if the community is totally alienated from it, then, as Damaris says, these girls, unfortunately, the alternative rite of passage may even alienate them further than they are already within their communities. Because by the time they come back, they feel they don't belong. And the community also perceives them as they don't belong. And this is where now the prolonged FGM will be undertaken on them, even sometimes when they are more mature, which is even more harmful medically. The older a girl or a woman is, the more harmful FGM might be to that woman. So maybe the question we need to ask is, who is writing the curriculum? Who is the driving force to this success story that is big? Unless the communities themselves come up with it and say, we want an alternative rite of passage. They define it and they drive it. Then maybe we can start talking of success.
So it needs more community buy-in.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, community
in the planning and the
oriented.
organisation.
Yes, and community. I also think the NGOs involve the community from the top, like bringing a light to the people. But I think if the NGOs or whoever else is doing the alternative lights would start from the grassroots, get to the community, find out from the community how long and why do you still continue. It's because this is what the FGM does to us, this is the meaning of it, and then take a curriculum that addresses exactly that. And the curriculum should come not from the NGO, from the people who are doing it themselves, involve them. And once they are involved, then they would embrace it. And maybe not even see it as an alternative light. They will see it as a light. Because you see, alternative means there is something else. But when it's this is now our light, they can come and say, this is now our light. Our girls are going to mature, to graduate this way. And therefore, they will not see it as an alternative rite of passage. It will be the rite of passage.
Can you explain a little bit about the meaning of initiation in your communities, of which FGM has traditionally been a part? But it's part of a much bigger process of becoming an adult, isn't it? Becoming a woman, in this instance, becoming a person.
Growing up in Africa is marked by several rites of passage. And these are rites where certain rituals are performed to an individual, right from birth, all the way to death, burial and funeral rites. And the initiation ceremony is one of the biggest because it forms the transition from childhood to adulthood, irrespective of the age that the community decides that this is initiation. Initiation is marked by the whole process of transition. The rituals involved, among them is the teaching of what is it that one is passing through as a rite of passage, what is it that you are learning, what is it that you are discarding as the old, and you are now getting into a new phase of life, and this is the new phase of adulthood. The cutting itself is a very small part of it, but a very unique, because it demonstrates so many aspects of whoever is going it, the neophyte who is going through the rite. The cutting is mutilating, and mutilating is to initiate the pain, and the pain, physical pain, and also the pain of separation. To leave, you are leaving a phase, you are crossing over to a new one, very important. So you must endure that pain, the pain of separate. So the female cut, or even the male cut, literally is performed to mark that ritualistic process of passing on. So when you remove that part and replace it with an alternative light, which is very, very artificial, it means this person will feel you have denied the person the whole process of initiation. So I would think again, any alternative rite of passage should focus on initiation. The whole process, the entire process, and maybe look for a particular aspect of the person going through it, which will signify or symbolize that painful cutting off. And the painful cutting off may not necessarily even mean the physical cut in a new dimension of seeing things. Within the indigenous African worldview, of the cat, there is also the bloodshed. And the bloodshed is very significant to the Africans because it's like it is uniting the unborn people, the living, and the future generations. So it's not just physical blood. So to replace that, you need something that will bring the same concept, that you are uniting the children with the present to the future generations. And this is why they say once you are a cat, you can now be a woman, you can give birth, you can sire children. It's not just the physical maturity that I am. Yesterday I was 12 years, today I'm 13 and I'm mature. No. There is more. There is the belief system within the people. So the alternative rite of passage is not addressing the belief aspect of the people. It is addressing just the physical. And this is why it's not working. Because people who don't go through the cat, in their belief system, they still feel, oh, we have still not gone through that. And this is why they go back to it, either later or when the ceremony is over. And I think, to conclude this, I would want to see a whole alternative rite of initiation. Alternative rite of initiation, and for me, not even, I don't even want to use the word alternative. I want a new paradigm shift in the rite of passage for girls in Africa. Yeah.
Thank you, Grace. Do you like to?
And probably I would just add
yes.
the fact that it was a big part of identity formation among groups of young, maturing girls, so that there is a huge element of education. And when I talk about education, it's about educating a girl in their culture, in their belief system, in how they do the stuff in their community, in how they become mothers, how they move from one stage to another and rear children and that sort of thing. So I think for me, initiation simply, the biggest part of initiation was to create this identity among this group of girls of whatever age they are, and that gave them a sort of a routine, a sort of a foundation in their community that they belong to that particular community.
And of course, it earned them new respect.
The new respect that they
respect
earn,
for them and for their parents.
and belonging, questions of belonging to that community.
Moving now to research, which is why we're here today, to prepare for a workshop on potential research on alternative rites of passage. It's a highly under-researched subject compared to FGM. I just wondered what you felt, some of the themes, the important themes there are to explore in research. Can you identify? I mean, you've already touched on this, Grace. Let's move away maybe from the notion of an alternative rite altogether to alternatives to initiation. But what kind of themes would you like to see explored in research?
I think I would also, in addition to the initiation process, what is the new curriculum that we want to put in place as a mark of belonging, as a mark of identity? Who is the author of this curriculum, or who should be the author of this curriculum? Who should even be the driving force? What would be the level of community engagement, processes, and end results, and how, and to what extent? And I would also think we would want to see, maybe we are talking about impact, like without empirical data, we would want to see empirically. Since the alternative rights started in Kenya, especially among the communities, that's where these success stories have been said. What is the view of those who have gone through it? What do they feel? How many have relapsed back to the cat? How many have persevered? And if they have, what do they feel? Is the degree of ostracization higher after the alternative right or before? And all that. To me, the research should focus broadly on, sort of scrutinizing what's happening, scrutinizing the effect, and also scrutinizing the impact and what is the way forward after all that.
I should just explain to viewers, by curriculum we mean the curriculum used in the instruction for girls that is a part of most alternative rites of passage. So NGOs typically have 4 or 5 days of instruction for girls, sometimes for boys too, in all kinds of subjects such as human rights, child rights, health issues, HIV.
And again, once more, the rite of initiation among the Africans did not just involve the neophyte, the girl who is going through it. It was a community process. If my daughter or my child is going through the rite of passage, everyone, the grandparent has a role, the aunties have a role, the co-wives, the extended, everyone in it. It is a family, a community affair. So we would also want to do the research to focus on, in the alternative rite of passage, to what extent is it embracing that African I am because we are. I am because we are. There's not, maybe like they would, taking a girl or rescuing, like my friend says, rescuing a girl, taking her here, go through the rite of passage. You have left the whole essence of the Africanhood. So future research should also focus on how much involvement has been done and how much involvement should be done to incorporate the entire concept of African Ubuntu into the system.
And to add on that, I think research should be able to focus on whether alternative rites of passage are just a hype. There's a lot of noise around alternative rites of passage. But in reality, the successes, the tensions, the paradoxes that it engenders needs to be studied empirically, because it seems to me that what we see is what the people who are in that field want us to see. Of course, that is driven by money, that is driven by job security, not necessarily change happening in communities. So I would want to see empirical studies, focusing on that. And I think there's also need for us to look at the level of community engagement. Who came up with alternative rites of passage? Who are the drivers of alternative rites of passage? And are they the only models? Again, is FGM. Is there another way that we can go around it and make sure that girls are saved from FGM? So we need to interrogate that. We need to know whether communities are involved. Certainly in my interactions with communities, they seem helpless. Like this is an imposition driven by, God knows what, because they don't seem to be involved in it. I came across girls and parents who felt that they didn't know where this came from. They only saw people on cameras and so many girls that are graduating. But when I asked them in my interviews, what is going on here? They say, we also don't understand. We just, we eat, we have merry, we sing, we dance, we are on television, and we go home, and we don't know what is happening. So I think we need to delineate the facts and reality from the hype that is created by organizations that are working with that. The other thing is the sustainability. Nobody has, to the best of my knowledge, I haven't come across any studies that have tried to understand its impact on sustainability. I know girls who have undergone FGM and undergone alternative rites of passage. They go back to villages, they undergo female genital mutilation. So there must be a problem there. There has to be a problem there. And that sort of paradox needs to be understood, because something is amiss for girls to go through both of them. It's either this way or that way. There has to be a problem there. The other thing that I would want to see focus in research is the role of academia. Academic research drives policy, in my opinion. But when you have people who are not necessarily trained in carrying out research and have learned to write projects that are geared to donor money and interest, there is a problem there. So we need to have people who are able to relook this issue of alternative rites of passage with all truth and honesty, based on data, based on ethnographic research out there in the field.
So you're saying you have a mistrust then of reports written by consultants who are hired by NGOs?
Sometimes I do.
That we need more independent research.
We need independent research. We need empirical research. We need field-based studies that go out and speak to communities, speak to those girls. For example, if alternative rites of studies, alternative rites of passage, started in the 1990s. I think in mid-1999, probably 1996 was the first alternative rites of passage. That is already about 25 years since its first inception in Kenya, at least for that matter. And 25 years is a lifetime for people to have studied to say if 30,000 girls, I don't know how many girls have graduated actually, but if we say, according to media reports, 3,000 girls from the Maasai community graduated every year. I would want to imagine that would, it's a high turnout of girls. Who has followed these girls? What are the stories of these girls? How many went ahead and became, mothers, married women without undergoing FGM? How many fell along the way and, went back and had FGM performed on them? So I feel there are these tensions that we need to focus on. There has to be a study that tells us, since its inception in this community, what is its success? What is its failure? Where have we gone wrong? Where can we improve? Is this model working? Is this curriculum working? What are the community-driven solutions? Because I have a very strong belief that for anything to succeed, it has to be community-driven. But if it is driven by outside interests, we will be going round in circles, and the war on FGM will never end.
Thank you very much indeed.
An impact assessment, sort of.
By independent.
Yes.
Qualitative and quantitative.
And an historical one.
Yeah.
A longitudinal one would be very useful, as you say, following that cohort of girls from 96 to the present day. What happened afterwards? We don't know.
And whether them, like now, a 25-year-old may also be having her own child. Maybe would want to know whether that such a person would prefer her own child to go through the alternative rite of passage or to go through FGM, because they are still within those communities. It's very crucial data.
Or whether ARP has been lost entirely in those communities. Maybe it's not practiced at all.
And there are girls who have refused to go through FGM, and they have not been asked not to go through it by any alternative rites of passage groups or any anti-FGM groups. These are just girls that, out of their own knowledge and what they have learned in school, determine for themselves that FGM is bad, and I'm not going to go through that.
I've interviewed girls like that.
We need to follow those stories.
Exactly. Outside of the
paradigm. Outside of the paradigm of the
ARP.
Right.
And I would also think we would also need to know there are communities which used to practice FGM in Kenya, for example, and they stopped. And the alternative rites of passage were not part of the reason that they stopped. Maybe research would also look at the models that these communities used, that FGM sort of died or got minimized, and yet there were no alternative rites. And maybe we would also like to borrow those models. What are the best practices that certain community used? or community B used, that communities which are still practicing FGM and where there is this hype of alternative rites of passages, is there something?
That's a very good point. What
Yeah.
were the kind of indigenous drivers
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
abandonment
Right.
that had nothing to do with external
Mhm.
factors?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. And we could learn from that, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we hope that going forward that there will be useful and practical outcomes of the research that we hope to do.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, both of you,
Thank you.
for taking part in this discussion. Thank you.
Welcome. Thanks.